I always thought I had my husband's brother figured out, quiet, stubborn, a little too proud to admit when he cared. But on Christmas morning, he walked into our living room with a plain brown box and a look I'd never seen before. 5 minutes later, a single sound filled the room, and my whole chest cracked open. Tears, the good kind, the kind that rush in when a truth you've been waiting years to hear finally arrives. And the reason he did it, the real reason, left me shaking in the doorway, whispering thank you into a silence that felt like snow. Before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I always love picturing the places where these stories land. Kitchens with coffee brewing, living rooms with the tree lights on, quiet bedrooms where the night is still soft. It was early, that color of morning that only happens in winter, pale as milk and slow to pour. Our house hummed with the little sounds of Christmas. The old radiator ticked. Pine needles had already started to fall, catching the light as they landed on the red tree skirt my mother stitched when I was 21. The coffee maker breathed and clicked like an old dog settling on a rug. I'm 56, and I like a holiday morning to move at the same pace I do, steady, gentle, with nothing loud enough to scare the past away. My husband, Tom, still in his flannel robe, fussed with the star that always leans, and I teased him for acting like a foreman over a 2-foot problem. Then came a knock. 3 sharp taps, like a decision. Michael never knocks like that. He's the kind of man who'll text outside and wait. He's Tom's younger brother by 4 years, and for as long as I've been in this family, he's worn his feelings like a winter coat he refuses to take off in the house. He stepped inside with a gust of air and a scatter of snow, stomping his boots and squinting around as if our Christmas had a password. He had the brown box tucked under one arm and a thermos clamped in his other hand. There's always a thermos, always black coffee. No cream, no sugar, no talk. "Merry Christmas," I said, but my voice came out careful without meaning to. You know how it is when there's a history with someone. Even your hello remembers. He nodded at Tom, then at me. "Morning," he said. "Got something I want to do first. It's quick." Tom lifted an eyebrow in my direction that said, "Go with it." We've learned to give each brother a little space with the other. Years before, when their mother got sick and everything felt like it was slipping, Michael and I had snapped at each other over something small that got tied to something big, an heirloom brooch, a list of bills, words said on the wrong day. The air never quite cleared. He decided I was bossy. I decided he was cold. So we had holiday truce smiles and nothing deeper. "I need the outlet behind the couch," he said, already crossing the room. "And if you don't mind, could you shut the blinds?" He was sweating under his navy pea coat, cheeks pink, eyes bright and fixed with something fragile. He set the box down on the coffee table with such care that I suddenly wanted to help, wanted not to spoil whatever this was. I pulled the blinds, clicked off the kitchen light, and in the dim, the tree seemed to glow on purpose, like a person who stays to hear the end of a story. Michael pulled out a small wooden object wrapped in tissue. At first I thought it was a toy. Then I saw the shape, an acorn. It was the size of my palm, smooth, a warm honey color, the grain swirling like a weather map. There was a tiny brass pin on the side and a thread-thin wire that trailed to a little black box with a switch. "It's not much," he said, clearing his throat. "But I need you to do exactly what I say." "Okay." "Okay," I said because I was curious, because I'd never heard him ask anything of me like that, not in 16 Christmases. He flicked the switch. A red dot glowed. He eased the acorn into my hands. It was warmer than it should have been, as if it remembered a tree. The brass pin trembled between my fingers. "Pull the pin," he said softly. "Close your eyes." I could hear Tom move closer. The house made one of those old house noises like a breath. I pulled the pin. First came a hush, then the brittle crackle of tape. Tape, the kind that swallowed whole summers, the kind you pressed with a pencil when it got eaten. And then, threaded through that soft static, a voice. A woman's voice. A voice that knew me when I still wore my hair long and didn't yet know how to cook a turkey without crying. "Sweetheart," it said, "if you're hearing this at Christmas, it means it worked." My knees gave out a little, and I sank onto the arm of the couch. You grow up thinking you'll forget the small pieces, the curl in a vowel, the way someone grins mid-syllable, but your heart keeps them somewhere secret. The voice was my mother's. Not an impression, not a memory telling itself back to me. Her, alive in a room where she had never stood. I tucked this into a shoebox, the voice went on, laughing like she did when she dropped pins on the kitchen floor and pretended not to care. Between the red starlights and that awful ceramic Santa you refused to hide. If your uncle hasn't thrown it out. I covered my mouth. The acorn trembled. Tom's hand touched my shoulder. He didn't speak. "I wanted you to have me where you always felt safest," my mother's voice said. "All this love, these mornings, what we don't say because we think the day will do it for us. I want to say it. I am proud of you, even when you're stubborn, even when you forget how extraordinary you are. Remember how the light looks on the tree right before breakfast? That's my favorite part. That's when I see you most." It lasted 37 seconds, the little machine later told us. 37 seconds where my mother and I lived in the same minute again, and every hurt I'd tucked into cleverness, every old argument, every unsent letter just let go. I cried the way you do when a surgeon pulls a splinter you'd learned to live around. I cried until the room blurred and the ornaments blurred and Michael's quiet face blurred and the world felt like a slate wiped clean with a warm palm. The message ended with a breath and a soft click. I didn't open my eyes right away. I listened to the tail of the static fade into the heater's slow tick, into the tree light's soft electric talk, into the shape of 3 people not knowing what to do with a miracle. When I looked up, Michael was turned partly away like he meant to give me privacy. He rubbed his jaw with the back of his hand. The thermos stood guard on the table like a small black tower. "How?" I asked. My voice sounded like I'd borrowed it. He swallowed and nodded toward the acorn. "Your mom's cassettes," he said. "They were never in the attic like everyone thought. They were in a box marked receipts. I took a load from the old storage unit last year when the roof leaked. I saw her handwriting. I recognized it from the recipes she used to send me, the ones you said tasted like a hug." His mouth twitched. The tape was mangled. "I found a guy in town who still fixes this stuff. He stayed late 3 nights in a row trying to save it. I wanted it to be clean before I showed you." I held the acorn to my chest. The wood smelled faintly like varnish and cinnamon. I could feel the tiny heart of it, battery, wire, memory, resting against my sweater, warm as a kitten. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, and I hated the way the me of the last decade hung on that question. The me that had been sure he wouldn't do anything for me if it didn't also do something for him. "Because I wanted to get it right," he said. He glanced at Tom, then back at me. "And because I haven't been fair to you. I kept waiting for you to soften first. That was pride. I'm not proud of it. There was a time not long ago when those words would have bounced right off my armor. But Christmas morning makes a woman braver, and 37 seconds of your mother's laugh rewrites a lot of chapters." I stood and crossed the room and hugged him. Michael is not a man you hug unless you mean it. He is a man of angles and caution. He stood very still for a second, Then he made a quiet sound, one that felt like a hinge loosening. His coat smelled like cold and old coffee, and beneath that, sawdust, the acorn. "Thank you," I said into his collar, "for the tape, for the work, for seeing me." He laughed, quick and embarrassed, and stepped back, eyes bright. "There's more," he said. "Not—" He lifted a hand, warding off any panic. "Not like that. I mean, I found something else, but it needs a little context." Tom poured coffee into 3 mugs. He handed one to Michael, even though Michael had his thermos. Ritual is a language, and on mornings like this, you speak every dialect you know. We sat. The tree clicked. Somewhere down the block, a plow sighed. "I used to come by your mother's place on Sundays," Michael said, turning the mug in his hands. "After church, when Tom was working. She'd give me a slice of that lemon cake and talk about her week. She talked about you a lot, not in a way that made me feel small, in a way that made me feel like I was watching someone love the world by loving one person very well. I thought of my mother's hands, the way she set a plate down as if it were a promise, the way she said my name like it was both a greeting and a blessing. "I didn't know you did that," I said. It didn't land as a grievance, just a new fact, an addition to the map that had been missing a river. "I didn't tell anyone," he said. "It wasn't a secret. It just felt like," he shrugged, "a good thing to do quietly." We were quiet for a while. Snow pecked the window like soft knuckles. I could feel the acorn's weight on my lap, and the longer I held it, the more it felt like part of the room's old story, as if it had been waiting in the wood all along. "I owe you an apology," I said finally, "for that day with your mother's brooch. You were right. I was bossy. I thought being the one who cared the loudest meant I cared the most. That wasn't fair." He met my eyes, steady. "I wasn't kind either. I mistook your strength for a wall. That wasn't fair." Tom cleared his throat like a referee who just witnessed the game end in a handshake. "Well," he said, smiling, "Merry Christmas." Michael half smiled, then slid his hand into the box and pulled out a second wrapped bundle, flat and square, the corners taped with that kind of carefulness that says, "Forgive me for everything I haven't said yet." He placed it on my knees. "This is the context," he said. "Open it slow." Beneath the tissue lay a photograph, black and white, the kind that looks like it remembers every finger that ever held it. It was my mother in her old kitchen, the one with the yellow walls. She was younger than I'd ever seen her, hair tied up in a scarf, a smear of flour on her cheek. She was looking straight into the lens the way you look at someone you love when you're trying to memorize them. And there I was, tiny on the counter beside a mixing bowl, eyes fierce with a kind of happiness I remember like a taste. "What? Where did you get this?" I whispered. Michael reached into the box again and handed me a paper envelope, brittle with age. On the front, in my mother's wide slanted hand, "For December, when the light is kind." "I think she meant to give you all of this one year," he said. "Maybe she thought she had more time." I slid the photo back into the tissue and opened the envelope. Inside was a small stack of notes, each folded and labeled with a word: courage, habit, joy, forgive. On the bottom, a final one, heavier paper, labeled simply, December. Tom leaned in, his breath warm on my temple. Michael looked away, giving me a square of privacy again. I opened the note marked December. "Sweetheart," it read, "if there's snow outside, I hope it's the kind that makes the world gentle. Here's what I want for you, for any December you're reading this. Choose what quiets your heart and do it without apology. Make the good coffee. Wear the sweater that remembers you well. Tell the truth even if your voice shakes. Do not give your joy to anyone who hasn't earned it. And when the morning turns light like milk, stand in it and let it remind you that you were a girl once who believed the day would show her something wonderful. She was right. I read it twice, 3 times, until the words stopped being ink and became a kind of warmth in my hands. My tears were different now, less sharp, more like a river you recognize from a favorite walk. Your mom was a poet, Michael said, almost shy. She was a nurse with good soap, I said, laughing wetly. But she wrote like she boiled, slow, with patience. We sat with it. There are mornings you fill with noise so you don't have to feel. This one we let be exactly what it was, fragile, generous, full. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. He tapped the acorn. There's a part 2, he said. Not today, not right this second, unless you want it to be. It's a little bigger. I didn't know if it would be too much, but I promised myself I'd ask. I looked at him and saw the boy he must have been, the one who learned to be useful so no one would ask him how he felt. I thought of the years I'd let pride sit between us like an uninvited guest at the table, and I thought of my mother's December note, the line about telling the truth even if your voice shakes. Ask, I said. I'm listening. He took a breath, steadying. I found something else in the storage unit, he said, voice low. It's not an object like this. It's more. A door. And if you're willing, I want to open it with you. Today. A long silence. Snow tracing its quiet arguments against the glass. Tom's hand found mine, and I felt every year of us in that touch, moves and mortgages and arguments and forgiven things. A door? I said, half smiling. Michael, what on earth does that mean? It means your mother didn't just leave a message, he said. She left a plan. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, a small punctuation. The tree leaned in, conspiratorial. The acorn, warm in my lap, seemed to wait. I wiped my face, took a breath that tasted like cinnamon and coffee and the first clean day of a new year. All right, I said. Tell me where we're going. And that's where I'll pause for now, with the snow still falling, the acorn in my hands, and Michael about to tell me something that would change not just that morning, but every December after. The silence after Michael's words was not empty. It was full. Full of questions I hadn't even shaped yet, full of memories trying to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My husband's brother had just told me my mother left behind more than a single message, more than a note. He said she left a plan. And as I sat there with the wooden acorn still warm in my lap, I realized that the Christmas morning I thought had already given me more than I could hold was only beginning. Where is it? I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Tom squeezed my hand once, as if to say, whatever it is, we'll face it. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his mug of coffee untouched. Not far. It's at the storage unit, the same one where I found the tapes. I didn't want to bring it here without you. It didn't feel right to open it alone. Something in the way he said alone made my throat tighten. For years I had thought of him as solitary by choice, but in that moment I wondered if what I'd mistaken for pride had been loneliness all along. We bundled up, scarves, boots, the kind of coats that make you waddle, and stepped outside. The air smelled of chimney smoke and sharp pine, and the snow under our boots made that clean, satisfying crunch. The sky had the heavy look of more snow coming, but for now the streets were hushed, as if the whole town had agreed to pause. The drive to the storage facility was only 10 minutes, but it stretched in the way winter roads do, with every red light long enough to think of something you weren't ready to think about. I stared out at the passing houses, each window a little square of someone else's Christmas, and wondered what it would mean to open a door my mother had left for me. A part of me wanted to turn around, curl back up under the tree lights, and let the morning end as it had begun. But the larger part knew, once you've heard your mother's voice again, you don't walk away from the chance of more. The unit smelled of dust and oil, the way old cardboard does when it remembers rain. Michael led us down a row of identical doors, each padlocked and numbered, until we stopped at one marked 217. He fumbled with his keys, his gloved fingers stiff, and when the lock clanked open it sounded louder than it should have. Inside, the cold air pressed against us like a second coat. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, some sagging, some labeled in my mother's looping handwriting. Against the far wall sat an old cedar chest, darker than the rest of the clutter, its brass latch tarnished green. It looked less like it belonged in storage, and more like it belonged in a story. "This is it," Michael said quietly. "I found it under a pile of broken lamps and winter coats. Haven't opened it. Figured it was yours to see first." My hands shook as I reached for the latch. The brass was icy, but the cedar smelled faintly of lemon oil, the way my mother used to rub down her kitchen table on Saturday mornings. When the lid creaked open, the scent deepened, and for a second I was standing in her house again, watching her wipe crumbs into her palm. The chest was filled with envelopes. Dozens of them, tied in neat bundles with twine. Some were labeled by months: January, March, July. Others by single words: patience, courage, light, and tucked on top of it all was a notebook, leather-worn soft, its cover pressed with tiny stars. I lifted the notebook, careful, and opened to the first page. Her handwriting, wide and slanted, spilled across it. "For when I can't sit beside you but still want to." Tears blurred my sight. Tom placed a hand on my back. Michael stood a little apart, arms folded, his face unreadable except for the shine in his eyes. The first entry was dated 20 years earlier. She had written about me, small things, everyday things. She wore the blue sweater today. She laughed at the dog slipping on the ice. She makes me proud when she doesn't even know she's being watched. It was as if she had kept a diary not of herself, but of me. I pressed the page to my chest. Why didn't she ever say? I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew. She had said, in the ways mothers do, through cake slices, through soft stars on crooked trees, through tucking words away in a chest for when they'd be most needed. We stayed in that storage unit longer than the cold should have allowed. I read aloud some of her words, my voice cracking, and Tom held my hand while Michael leaned back against the wall, listening. For once, none of us filled the silence with nervous talk. We just let it be what it was. Sacred. Finally, I closed the notebook. My fingers were stiff, my cheeks raw from tears. She wanted us to have this, I said. Not just me. Us. Michael's mouth twitched as if he wanted to smile but couldn't quite manage it. I think she did. She always said Christmas was about family, about mending what's frayed. The ride back felt different. The snow was falling harder, but inside the car the air was warm, threaded with something I hadn't felt in years, a kind of peace that wasn't loud but steady. At home, we placed the notebook on the table, lit a candle beside it, and brewed another pot of coffee. The tree leaned, the radiator ticked, the morning stretched into afternoon. And when we sat down together, the three of us,